Welcome back to Weekly Briefing. We are here with our panel of experts. Joining me in studio, Andrew Naggs, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Combating Terrorism, and now CEO of PASM Solutions International. Chris Farrell, Director of Investigations at Judicial Watch and author of Exiled Emissary, George Earl III. Dr. Shay Bradley Farrell, President of Counterpoint Institute for Policy, Research, and Education. And Demetrius Minor, member of Project 21 and political commentator. Joe Biden gave his second solo press conference in over 300 days this week. Remember, he's only been in office for a year. Biden was angry and defiant, defending his administration's actions throughout his first year. He even said they've over-delivered for the American people.
Is up. Your signature domestic legislation is stalled in Congress. In a few hours from now, the Senate, an effort in the Senate to deal with voting rights and voting reform legislation is going to fail. COVID-19 is still taking the lives of 1,500 Americans every day, and the nation's divisions are just as raw as they were a year ago. Did you overpromise to the American public what you could achieve in your first year in office, and how do you plan to course correct going forward?
Why are you such an optimist? Look, I didn't overpromise, but I have probably outperformed what anybody thought would happen.
He's outperformed, and I just wanted to point out that that question came from the Associated Press, which is by no means a right-leaning organization. Dr. Shay, has Biden outperformed expectations?
I laughed out loud when I heard that. He's not even on the underperformed scale. Let me give you a few examples. We're on the verge of some sort of economic collapse.
Right.
Our southern border has totally ceased to exist. He surrendered Afghanistan to terrorists.
And is funding them.
And now is and ironically funding their humanitarian aid, where if we hadn't pulled out the way we did, that wouldn't be needed. Anyway, I digress. Crime and murder rates are at a high that certainly in living memory has not occurred. And these are not political sound bites that I'm giving, which he did in his speech. I'm telling you the facts.
Right. Chris, did Joe Biden overperform?
He is not. And when you compare Trump year one on accomplishments, just bullet points, just run down the list, versus Biden's year one, Dr. Shay gave a very brief summary. There is a litany of failures across any number of, whether it's economic questions, social questions, law and order questions.
It's hard to find a success. What has he done well?
It is, and the other part of it is that it's also just terribly awkward and embarrassing. He's completely detached from reality. Kamala Harris is a laughingstock. She goes overseas and embarrasses herself on a weekly basis. The rest of the world looks at America, and there's no confidence there.
Right. Demetrius, can you find a success of Biden's, or do you think this is just a situation where he is genuinely clueless? Because I do think it's possible that he has no idea how poorly he's doing because his handlers are telling him that America loves you, you're doing great, and so he actually thinks that that's true.
Well, he definitely has not overperformed, but I would suggest to the president to maybe talk to Jimmy Kimmel and to Jimmy Fallon for a spot at the late night comedy host, because that was pretty hilarious what he said. I would just ask members of the Democratic Party if he's overperformed, because if he's truly overperformed, first of all, he wouldn't have the low approval ratings that he has. Second of all, Democrats will be much more positioned to do better in the upcoming midterm election. Look at the state of Virginia, which for intents and purposes, a blue state that just went red in the gubernatorial race.
Right.
And if that trend follows, then there's going to be a red tsunami wave this coming November. Yeah. And so Democrats are running away from the Biden agenda. And as my colleagues just mentioned, with the exception of the COVID bill that was signed early on in his presidency, there has been no legislative achievement for President Biden. Build Back Better is dead. Everything that he's proposed is dead or dying.
Everything he's
And so I think the president needs to take a step back. I think he needs to do some serious reevaluation and maybe take a note from the playbook of Bill Clinton's presidency, where Bill Clinton was at least politically savvy enough to move towards the center
Right,
instead of Biden playing from the progressive.
Yeah,
front.
I think he's out of touch with reality.
Right, and Clinton was forced to go there, by the way, too, with the Gingrich revolution. But if we take the president at his word, what he's doing is he's conflating a response to a worsening economic situation with which is economic cycles are what they are.
Right.
He's conflating that with the actions of his own administration. Now, his administration, what they have actively done has made things worse, whether it's, supporting vaccine and mask mandates, opening our border, essentially dissolving our sovereignty, and on and on and on, pursuing this ill-conceived notion of just shoveling and printing more money and pushing that into the economy and ignoring the inflationary impact. So those are decisions that were actively made by this administration, and supposedly led by this president, and that hangs squarely around his neck, and and his party is going to pay for that.
Yeah, I don't even think he's aware of it. ESPN personality Stephen A. Smith detailed his battle with COVID, where he suffered severe symptoms, ended up in the hospital, and almost died. And he says that this is proof that the vaccine worked.
I had 103-degree fever every night. Woke up with chills and pool of sweat. Headaches were massive, coughing profusely. And it got to a point that right before New Year's Eve, I was in the hospital New Year's Eve into New Year's Day. That's how I brought in the new year. And they told me, had I not been vaccinated, I wouldn't be here.
Andrew, what?
Yeah, so I've got to challenge this head on, and perhaps somebody here can help me with this. When have we ever regarded, before the last 18 months, when have we ever regarded a vaccine as being a mitigation approach to the severity of illness? I mean, has anyone ever heard of, well, I won't get polio as bad, right? I won't get meningitis as terrible.
Smallpox.
No, of course not.
I just got a little bit of smallpox.
That has never been a part of the promise of vaccines. Now, look, different variants every year. You get your flu shot, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, maybe there's an argument there, but they won't make it because they don't want to connect this virus with the flu and similar levels of severity. But my question here to my colleagues is, does anyone recall this narrative of a vaccine just lessening the severity of an illness? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I've never heard of that. I mean, Chris can jump in, but he's exactly right. What people have done during this COVID pandemic is use unscientific statements as blanket statements to say that this is fact. And that has been such a huge problem with COVID. And it has affected people's health, and it's a very serious thing. It's unscientific blanket statements shown as fact. I personally had a friend about 6 months ago who was not vaccinated, got COVID, had the severity that this guy is describing, and is still alive. So should I say that that's proof that not getting a vaccine works? Of course not.
They seem to just be making the narrative whatever will fit the political agenda for what they have. But when we come back from the break, we'll talk about Wisconsin election fraud in the 2020 election and a new survey that shows how Democrats truly feel about the unvaccinated. We'll be right back.